Welcome, everyone. My name is David Ellwood, and I'm especially pleased to see you here on, frankly, one of the lovely evenings of the year. And so it's a lovely evening outside, but it's going to be even more inspirational inside. And this is the very first day of classes here at the Kennedy School and throughout Harvard. And so it's especially important that we start by celebrating the most important value that we all share here at the school, and it's really fundamentally about making the world a better place. But instead of me talking about that, I would also like to mention that this is also, we're celebrating this year, our 75th anniversary as this school. Now, in fairness, we were not called the Kennedy School 75 years ago, but we're always about making the world better and advancing the public service. And so as part of that, we have a very quick video. You'll recognize some of the faces, and others are people around here that you may or may not recognize. And I wanted to just start there, and then we'll turn to the panel. So we can roll the clip.
'75th anniversary? Wow.
It's a very special place. The conversations, the forums, the debates, but above all, the serious grappling with the great questions that confront this country.
There's something about the place that just rubs off on everybody here. We expect every single student who leaves here to go and make a difference. What we do is give them the tools.
There is an intensity, a level of intellectual experience here that is unique. For any young graduate student interested in the world, interested in politics, this would be an extraordinary place to spend a couple of years.
The absolute sense across the Kennedy School that there's a kind of collective challenge that we all face is really exciting. I've never had so many opportunities that I've wanted to take thrown at me in one go.
This is where an awful lot of the best minds go to understand the real world, how things fit together. And this country is better off because of the K School.
To try and change the world is too hard of a job to do it alone. The Kennedy School is a magical place not only to learn, but to find others that share that same dream, to find others that make you feel like you're not alone.
What I learned at the Kennedy School that was most useful for me, negotiation, diplomacy. When you negotiate better, when you problem solve better, things get done better. There's a time to be with the glove in the face, but there's also a time to be at the table and discuss. And that I didn't know before I came in here.
The Kennedy School gave me a very important experience. I realized that the knowledge itself is not important, but how you analyze the situation, that is what I learned. From Harvard, the Kennedy School.
For me, this was the opportunity of a lifetime. There were just so many good people there. It just broadened my own perspective. Whatever I am today, I may say that the year and a half I spent at the Kennedy School really made a big difference in my life.
Every year at the Kennedy School, we have about 550 or so new students. I give an opening address because I'm the dean. And in that opening address, I take a speech that John F. Kennedy gave at Vanderbilt about the meaning of service.
I speak to you today, not of your rights, but of your responsibilities.
These are people from 90 different countries. Almost none of them were alive when Kennedy was alive. And yet, when he talks about the responsibility and opportunity when you engage with and care about something larger than yourself, you can hear a pin drop.
You must decide, as Goethe put it, whether you will be an anvil or a hammer, whether you will give to the world, in which you are reared and educated, the broadest possible benefits of that education.
It's really important to find a way back to this notion that we all have an obligation to serve. My dad and my grandfather taught me the same thing, that public service was a noble calling, irrespective of your views on policy, that people should have a desire to serve, and there's lots of ways to do it.
Despite the highly partisan, highly cynical world we live in today, there will always be a place for dedicated public servants who put their country and their world before their own ambitions. This is what the Kennedy School instills in all those people who have the hopes and the dreams and the desire to go out and be great public servants.
There is a headwind that blows against the kind of sacrifice and service that President Kennedy spoke about so many years ago. But as I go around the country, I find people more and more understand that we have an obligation to help people around the world who are in need. And so I have the same optimism now that I had back in the 60s when President Kennedy told us all to serve.
The thing I would say going forward is to maintain always at the front of Kennedy School mind, if you will, the fact that it's business, it's important business, is profoundly unfinished.
In the early days of the Kennedy School, public service meant working in government. Now, public service means many, many things to many, many people. A big challenge moving ahead is to figure out how to serve those many students who will become leaders in ways that are more diverse than President Kennedy ever imagined.
President Kennedy combined rigor and relevance. That's very much what the Kennedy School stands for. It asks some of the most relevant questions of the 21st century and analyzes possible solutions in the most rigorous ways.
What the school has been able to do for the US is phenomenal over the last 20, 30 years or so in terms of getting evidence-based policy making to really inform actual decision making. And I think that's a role which we as a school now need to play for the world.
Pretty much everywhere I go, the presence of Kennedy School graduates helping to fashion the reforms that countries need to move forward is really a sign of encouragement for me, in the sense that we are doing a job that needs to be done and that the world is appreciating.
The engagement with the world and the call to public service is very much a part of our past, our present, and our future. It's that continuing commitment that we carry on and that I hope this school will continue to carry on for many generations to come.
As we think about the next 75 years for the Kennedy School, there will of course be opportunities that we can't imagine right now. I'm not sure what those issues are going to be that will most engage us as a civilization, but I know that the Kennedy School is going to be at the forefront of them, whatever they may be.
We're here today to talk about our future, much more than our past, but we have with us four people that are graduates of the Kennedy School and who are very much about shaping the future, not only for this nation but for the world, and who are fundamentally about thinking about something larger than themselves, and therefore we're very, very proud to have them with us. Let me very briefly introduce each of them. You have short bios of them in the program, and frankly, you're much more interested in hearing from them. So let me start by introducing Secretary Shaun Donovan. He's the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. He is a graduate of both the undergraduate as well as the Kennedy School and the Design School. Throughout his life, he's been very, very much committed to a set of public policy issues, particularly those around housing. Among the many things he's done during the Clinton administration, he was a Deputy Assistant Secretary. He was acting head of the Federal Housing Authority during the transition. He was also the New York City's commissioner for housing preservation and development. By the way, I really like that name. And now, of course, he's leading HUD. And of course, he has taken over this agency at one of the most important and challenging periods, probably in American history, for housing, on everything from what the future of a housing will be, and obviously with a whole set of crises that the financial crises arguably originated in some of the ways in which we had been financing and supporting housing in the past. So it's a particular honor to have Shaun Donovan here. Next, I want to talk about Pam Kingpetcharat. She is the Chief Administrative Officer for Human Rights First. And Pam, in much the way that Secretary Donovan, I'm sorry, Shaun, I'll try my best. We're going to try and be on a first name basis here, but I worked for a secretary, and it's hard.
I'll call you Dean if you don't.
And I'll be good. But she has had a very diverse career. She was a graduate of this school back in 2005, an MPID program. And she has, throughout her life, done a series of different kinds of activities. She, for example, has worked for the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, Accenture, Merrill Lynch, the Peace Corps in Ghana, Dahlberg Global Development Advisors, and now she's the COO of Chief Administrative Officer of Human Rights First, an organization that really started as Lawyers for Human Rights and works very hard to trying to take advantage of the legal frameworks that countries already have around the world and other kinds of factors. For example, they brought together a whole group of retired generals to support sets of issues around human rights and the like. It's terrific to have her here. Next, I want to introduce Mayor Joe Curtatone. He is the mayor of Somerville. Now, I first came to Boston back in 1971. And I have to tell you that if you'd said to me in 1971 that when the Kennedy School wants to celebrate public service, they'll bring the mayor of Somerville, I would have been somewhat skeptical because Somerville had a reputation as a good, decent, working city, but it also had a faint air of at least inefficiency and perhaps a little worse, so. Now, this city of Somerville, where the mayor was raised and was a graduate of Somerville High and the like, is a shining example. The Boston Globe magazine called it the best run city in Massachusetts. America's Promise Alliance called it one of the 100 best communities for youth in the country, and it was a winner of the 2009 All-America City competition. It's quite extraordinary, and it's due to the hard work of a whole lot of people, but more than any one person, it's this mayor. He came in and decided he was going to be about performance. He was going to be about thinking about ways to streamline and make the government work better. And so whether it's the using performance-based management systems or it's calling 311 to get whatever you need from the city, there's issue after issue where he's done it. The more interesting feature of this story is part of the story involves coming to the Kennedy School when he was first elected a new mayor. He came to the new mayor's program that we run here at the Institute of Politics, and he met one of our faculty members, Linda Bilmes, who talked about how you could really use performance management and make it work. He said, "Oh, that's great, I'd love to do it, but we can't afford to hire, whatever the consulting firms are." And so I think maybe it was the mayor of Boston, but maybe someone else would say, "Oh, get the Kennedy School to do it. They'll do it for free." So he went and spoke to a bunch of students, told them, I want your best efforts. I want you to work night and day for our city. I'll pay you nothing. Did it, put it together, and ultimately, I think, made a huge difference. Moreover, those students learned a lot. But just like, the man who used to, the advertisement where he said, "I like the product so much I bought the company," he liked the product so much he came to the school. So he's also he graduated here just last year after spending here as a mid-career student. Finally, I want to introduce Carie Lemack, who is the co-founder of the Global Survivors Network, which is a network of survivors of terrorism across the world. She was also co-founder of the nonprofit, nonpartisan organization Families of September 11th, which she helped to create and lead after her mother, Judy LaRocque, was killed on American Airlines Flight 111 when it crashed into the Trade Center. She has worked tirelessly and quite thoughtfully on making sure this kind of activity doesn't happen again, but also for recognizing the kind of support and the ways in which survivors can be a force for unbelievable good and unbelievably improving our future. She's been involved in all kinds of activities at all levels of government. So it's her most recent activity, for example, is she's collaborated in the creation of an HBO film called In the Name. Have I got this right? What's that? Killing in the Name. I'm sorry, very important. Which is going to be shown on September 14th or something like that?
On HBO too. And
on HBO, so there we go.
Do it here.
So obviously we have four very diverse, very exceptional human beings here. And so with that, I want to start, I'll just go right down the group here, but hopefully we'll have some discussion and then time for Q&A. And I guess I'm kind of interested in two kinds of things, which is what gets you up in the morning? why do you get up and not just hide your head under the covers? Because frankly, some days it feels that way right now. And frankly, how did you end up here anyway? So, Shaun.
So my story actually comes back to this room a little bit. And I was a senior at Harvard undergrad, volunteering in a homeless shelter just at the church right across the way. And like most graduating seniors, had very little idea what I was going to do with my life, but was really interested in homelessness and was also interested in architecture. And went to work for a group called the Coalition for the Homeless because I came here to the IOP. The founder of the Coalition for the Homeless was speaking one night, just like you. I was here, completely inspired by his story, and I walked up to him afterwards and said, what can I do? And I ended up working for the National Coalition and sort of led me down a path of service. But I think one of the important things, and to some degree sad things about the time I grew up in, and maybe it's even more true today, is that I never really thought about government service when I thought about service. I ended up coming back to the architecture school. I came to the Kennedy School only as a visitor to take Bill Apgar's class, who's sitting in the front row, got totally hooked on housing policy. But when I graduated from the Kennedy School, I thought the place I can make the most difference, I'm going to go work for a nonprofit in New York City and try to change neighborhoods and cities one building at a time. And it was only when Bill ended up becoming FHA commissioner in the Clinton administration and said, you want to come down and try this, I sort of said to myself, well, that's crazy, you know, leave a job in a place that I love in New York and go to Washington. But I ultimately couldn't say no. It was an offer I couldn't refuse for Bill.
I like it that then you repeated that offer to him when you became secretary.
That's right. But, you know, it is, I think it says a lot about the experience of government that until I was there, and really only 3 months in when I figured out that this is something I couldn't not do. Frank Lloyd Wright was, as an architect, said, if you can do anything else, you should. And I felt that way a little bit in the early days of government, just how hard it can be sometimes. But I also knew that I couldn't do anything else literally because I was hooked after those first few months of doing it. The scale that you can work at, the impact that you can have in people's lives. And you know, given the partisanship, given the things that we're struggling with, I often say, you know, I don't necessarily like my job every day, but I love my job every day. And that is what keeps coming back to me is I can make a difference in a way that I could doing very few other things.
Let me ask you about this partisanship issue for a moment. Obviously, this is a time when it feels like things aren't working very well at a lot of levels. Somehow or other, the country's first feels further from the public dialogue than we want, and partisanship, certainly in Washington especially, is at levels that I don't think most of us can remember. How do you nonetheless go to work every day, and are there ways in which you can really succeed in spite of that?
Yeah.
Or even take advantage of it?
I'll be honest, this is one of the toughest things about what we're experiencing right now. And I came from working for Mayor Bloomberg. I often like to joke that I've worked for all three parties in my life, and that's just under one mayor. So, you know, I couldn't imagine a less partisan, in many ways, environment to come out of. And it is enormously difficult. You know, the way I keep going, frankly, part of it is doing this, is in talking to folks about why you are reminded and hearing the stories of the other panelists here, it's part of reminding you of what's there. And part of it is keeping the connection with the reasons you got into it in the first place. Last week, I was on 9 planes last week in 5 days, but they included a visit to Native American pueblos in New Mexico to help them rebuild some of the oldest settlements in the entire US. It included visits to Native Hawaiians to help them I handed the keys to a Native Hawaiian family, the very first home they've ever owned with their 4 children, and watched the father weep as I handed him that key. And so in a very direct way, understanding that in the abstraction, in the fights that we have, they matter. And I think part of it, you and I were just talking about this a little bit, you know, remember that we're going through one of the biggest economic dislocations in the history of this country. And if you look back at the history, as time recedes, big things look easier. They're incredibly difficult at the time that they're made. Whether it's, I saw a great documentary that Ken Burns did about the founding of the national parks. The fights over what we think of now as an absolute good to establish the Smoky Mountain National Park or whatever it might be, were enormous fights between landowners and preservationists, environmentalists. Anything that's big, that's worth doing, is hard. And I just got to keep telling myself that.
Well, and I also just think when the economy is tough, it's tough on everyone. Nobody really wants to listen. Everybody wants to blame somebody else. And so thank you.
And as public servants, we have to remember folks are angry for a reason, and it's not personal. There are lots of folks who have lots of reason to be angry about housing right now, about what was done to them, what happened to them. And as public servants, we have to remember that part of our role is responding to that and not taking that personally.
And part of the reason they're focused is you actually can make a difference for them, and that's terrific. Let me now turn to Pam. And Pam, again, what gets you up in the morning, and how did you get to where you have to get up anyway?
I think it's very similar, actually, to the response already given, which is, for me, it was the pursuit of one question, actually, and that is, how do countries and how do people develop? And that's actually taken me from the Fed to Merrill to Accenture, and I never, ever would have thought that I would have ended up in a nonprofit management role. I actually, for a long period of time, thought, as I worked at Merrill and Accenture, this is really interesting. It's very intellectually challenging. Then I hit a wall where I felt like I was solving the same problems over and over again, and I could actually answer this question in two very distinct ways. One way where if you look at my history, you pull up from your past in the way that somebody else describes your history. My parents learned English from a Peace Corps volunteer. I was a Peace Corps volunteer. I paid back. I've done my time in public service, and I've also done my time in the private sector world, and I've always felt a translator between the two. And then if you look at where my work leads me today, I continue to perform translation services from the operations end, making sure that Human Rights First can achieve its ultimate mission, which is to reframe the role of human rights in everything that we do, from law and security to essentially refugee protection. So a lot of what I do today is about, intellectually for me, the challenge. This is really hard because as a trained economist, I look at this and I was naive enough to come to the Kennedy School and go, well, the facts all say that you should make this choice. Why doesn't everybody just make that choice? Why can't everybody see the facts? And what you learn from the Kennedy School and what you learn from real life is that people have emotions, and and fundamentally, change only happens if people all agree to it. So what's the difference between HBS and the Kennedy School? The Kennedy School really focuses on stakeholder management, on really not only recognizing the way people feel about their condition, but helping them move past that to solve the problem. And so what I do today is really a reflection of that, is moving past being a consultant and doing development from a hands-off perspective to having skin in the game, and helping manage an organization that helps to really make human rights kind of that foundational piece before rule of law, before institutions, before development happens. So for me, it's really a theory of change.
Now, you're obviously deeply committed to all this, and I love the story about your parents. This was in Thailand where they were
exactly
trained, and you yourself were Peace Corps volunteer later?
I was.
Yeah, that's a wonderful circle. But you are also in a role right now that's you're absolutely one of the most essential, maybe the most essential roles in an organization, which is to really make it run, to manage it, to be the chief administrative officer and so forth. But I'll bet there are some people in the audience thinking, well, I'd like to be the head, or I'd like to be on the ground, or I'd like to, and yet, how do you feel like you miss, just as Shaun was talking about, getting out and seeing the folks, as it were? Do you get a chance to do that? How do you keep I guess another way to put this is, you are there because you really fundamentally want to change things. Can you find the excitement and the energy and so forth, even as you're running the organization?
Absolutely. I'll take for example, the fact the organization is really set to double in the next 5 years really makes this a challenge, because in any well-run system, if all the processes and all the things aren't in place, then people can't all be focused on the ultimate goal, because they're too busy trying to make sure that this penny went over here and this penny went over there. What I'd like what this allows me to do is make sure that as an institution, we agree on what the rules of the game are. And once we agree, then it allows all of us to focus on the end goal. And it also allows me, because where we're headed as an organization is really into areas of internet freedom and business and human rights. And so, once, and even in the nick of things, for example, we've got staff members in Indonesia today and in places like Egypt. I need to make sure that they're okay, that the relationships are developed. We're also looking at developing relationships with the Kennedy School and other partners that could help us advance our work. So just because it seems kind of nitty-gritty, I'm in the details, I'm also in the details on the really great things too. So being an executive team member allows me that freedom to not only make decisions and help operate and make sure that the organization runs as an institution that will be there for the next 30 years to come, but also get a little bit of the interesting work in there with the human rights work on the ground.
But I just think, any organization, whether it's the Kennedy School, which I see more directly, or Human Rights Watch or anything else, the truth is the really important work isn't just describing what the vision is. It's doing it. It's making it happen. And that's just absolutely vital. And that really is real leadership. That is, that's really what it's all about.
And I think that the commonality amongst all the panel members is that we're there to build the institutions in which we work. And leaving that as the core, even when we leave, that matters, and that not only does it matter, but it consistently treats people with fairness and with dignity. I think it's critical, and people oftentimes don't, unfortunately, see public service as building institutions, but that's kind of core what it is.
I'd like to hold on to that thought. I think it's terrific, and it's a perfect way to segue into Joe, who obviously has been right at the center of building up Somerville and the Institute. So again, what gets you up in the morning, Joe, and how did you end up being mayor?
Usually it's 4 reasons that get me up. My 4 boys, 8, 6, 5, 3, are jumping up
Yeah,
by
4
5,
boys, exactly.
And I want to get the hell out of my house by 6. What drives me every day is really the love. This is probably the greatest job you can have, is being mayor of a city like Somerville. And if you truly believe in the greatness of the American city, having a job like this is really, it's motivating. And part of what we're doing, we like to say, is reinventing the 21st century American city. We have one oriented value that drives our organization. That's to make Somerville a great place to live, to work, to play, and raise a family. So I get up every morning, oriented by that value, that overarching purpose, and I'm literally running to my office. But I never really thought I'd be in public office, and everybody will say that at some point in their career. In fact, I swore I never would be. In 1995, I had still was looking back at my sister's election for mayor in Somerville in 91. I said, I don't know why the hell you ever ran for office. Don't count on me doing that. I was heading to a prosecutor's office to be an assistant district attorney. And this has happened several times in my professional career. My sister reminded me about why she ran, and sort of instilled to me that you need to step back and think about what you're really trying to do with your life and your career. And in 1995, I ran for 2 reasons. And Somerville, it seems to, you kind of alluded to it, seems to always be in transition and a crossroads. And we were going through our set of challenges for many decades. In the early 90s, we had our social, cultural, and economic challenges. And my personal life exposed me a lot to working with youth organizations. I was coaching and mentoring for most of my adult life. And my family also administered and owned a nursing home, so dealing with senior services. And so those 2 issues, I thought, very simple. I thought the city, the 2 of the segments of our population we paid very little attention to, our youth and our seniors. I thought, hey, they need to do a better job. And my sister's words rang in my ear, and I just said, I'm going to give it a shot. I'm going to run. So I ran for the local legislative body, called the Board of Aldermen. Never thought I'd win. And for better or worse, I won. And I was often serving in the aldermen in a legislative body. for 8 years, one of the things that really drove me to run for mayor was this self-perception by the people at our institution that we couldn't be great as an American city. You know, that we were going to be, and we can't use the term we used to call Somerville years ago that I grew up with because it's part of our branding exercise. We promised not to use it again. But, you know, that we couldn't be the standard for management, for public safety, for urban planning and development. That, you know, most of the time I grew up, people wanted to get out of the city. Now they want to come back. So I thought, you know, we should be setting that standard. We should be a model for fiscal management, for urban planning and development, for improving quality of life and customer service, and adopting the best practices of the public-private sector and setting that model. And you know, I was also inspired by some work I did in the Rappaport Institute here at the Kennedy School, where they had educational courses for municipal leaders, and seeing the things happening around the country and saying, my God, why aren't we doing these things? So I ran for mayor again in 2003, and I was fortunate enough to win, and we've been off since. But every day it's really, it's doing the job and seeing the tangible things you can do as a mayor. You don't have to wait several years for legislation to take effect. I go through my front door, and from the parking lot to my office, I'll have a discussion with the senior citizen who has a problem in the neighborhood, a member of our youth who's having some issue at school, and they'll go meet with a $1 billion developer in my office. So I run the gamut all up a couple of flights of stairs. So it's an exciting job, and we're just a city that's very fortunate that's on the move. And again, I truly believe in the greatness of the American city, and I get to be the mayor of, I think, is the best city in the world.
Now, you know, you're obviously a leader of a city at a time when politics has gotten even more of a blood sport, it feels like, when people are very cynical, when they, you know, if ever there was a time people don't believe in government, it feels like now's kind of the thing. So, and you come in and sort of say we want to have management principles. By the way, you have a whole bunch of people in there already who are pretty happy with the way things are running just now. Thank you very much. How do you do that? How do you create that kind of spirit and so forth? Is that hard, or is it actually, are people craving it?
I think people are craving. People want their leaders to succeed, and in Somerville, they want their city to be great. There are people who grew up there all their entire lives and seen the bad times, you know, times of corruption, mismanagement. The city couldn't get out of its own way, and carried that burden on their shoulders for many decades. There are newcomers, and say we've been there 20 years or less, and there are people, our population's younger. 44% of our population is between the age of 22 and 35, and they want greatness for their city. And yeah, there's a lot of cynicism for politics and what's happening in Washington. No offense, Mr. Secretary. Not towards the Obama administration, because we're Obama country. And it's funny, because we're where the rubber meets the road, we like to say. Any mayor in the U.S. will tell you that. And 2 out of 3 people blame us for something. You know, something happens in Washington, we're going to get part of the blame no matter what. But what we want to do, and part of our responsibility is to improve your quality of life. You know, in Somerville, and we did this happiness survey. We're the first city in the world to do a happiness survey. So we joined the ranks of Bhutan and France. And 3/4 of the people in the city are happy. And you know, what we're trying to understand is the correlation between that and municipal policy. I'd like to infer from it that no matter what's going on in the world with the fiscal crisis, what's happening in your job and your life, that when you walk through your front door, come out to your porch, what you touch, you feel, you see, what is happening in your neighborhoods, the social fabric, your surroundings, your neighbors, you can go back and say, I'm glad I'm back in Somerville. I'm glad right here. So that keeps people motivated. And yeah, I think we strive for greatness as a city, and our population demands it.
Oh, that's great. Here, let me ask you about, you know, what gets you up in the morning. Obviously, yours is a very different kind of story. But you know, tell us more about it.
I think the obvious answer is obviously what happened to my mom. I want to make sure it never happens again, and I hope that no one in the audience has to have that kind of inspiration. So hopefully you'll find something else to inspire you and have a much more positive entry into whatever it is you're going to do. Can I just say that I watched that video, and I saw all those quantitative formulas on the blackboard, and actually I don't use any of them. So for all of you today, I know it's your first day, and if you had one of those classes and you looked at it like that, you're going to be okay. So take a deep breath, relax, you'll make it through. So for my inspiration, for me, it is my mom and it's my nephews. I have 2 little baby nephews, Cole and Mason, who are 6.5 and 4 and very good Red Sox fans. They should be watching the game pretty soon, hopefully, and they better be rooting for the Red Sox.
Tough game last night, but you know.
No, last night they weren't watching. But But I want to make sure I create a better world for them, and so that they don't have to live through what we're all going through now, this so-called post-9/11 generation. And I think you can all probably relate to that. I'm not really expounding on something you couldn't imagine already. But I think one thing for me that is so important is just to be able to go out there and do something. And in fact, I was talking today earlier to Professor King, who, if any of you are very lucky, you'll take his class on Congress. It was one of my favorite classes here. And he said to me, you know, people always talk about what they want to be. And you hear that all the time when you're a little kid. What do you want to be? What do you want to be? And I really think more about what do you want to do? Because you can be a lot of things and keep doing the same thing in different ways. And so for me, I want to do something, make an impact so that I never have to come home and find out that more people suffered the way my family and so many others have suffered, and think to myself, I didn't do enough. And I know after 9/11, many of the Pan Am 103, that's the plane that exploded over Lockerbie, Scotland, many of the families who lost loved ones, they felt that they had been fighting to improve aviation security for 13 years at that time. And after 9/11, they felt like their loved ones' murders weren't enough, and they hadn't done enough. And the Boston Globe had this big article about it just a couple weeks after 9/11. And I saw it, and I showed my sister, and I said, we need to make sure Mom's murder is enough, and that we're doing everything we can. And so what's kind of interesting about that is that can mean a whole slew of things. So since 9/11, I've done everything from, I was actually part of the first group of people to ever protest outside a White House Christmas party. I think it's a badge of honor. And I think more people should do it. It's kind of fun. We did a silent vigil. It turns out that congressmen, I think I can say this, right? They drink a lot, and a lot of them aren't sober when they come to the White House Christmas party.
Lots of soda and water, yeah.
And if you want to, I wasn't there for that Christmas party. I have to tell you, if you ever want to have an interesting sight, go down to the White House when the members of Congress and their families are coming in, because it was a show. Good times. But we've done all sorts of things. And then I got to make a movie, a documentary film, which got an Academy Award nomination. So I got to go to the Oscars, which was a whole other story. And now it's premiering on HBO, which is very exciting. And hopefully you guys maybe even see it in the forum if it's available. I don't know, so we'll have to find out. But the point is, what I've done is looked at what do I have now as someone whose mom was killed on 9/11. We have moral authority. So how can we use it, and what's my goal? The goal is to make sure it never happens again. Well, there's lots of ways you can use the moral authority, and you have to stick to your guns on that, which meant for me not getting political. So even in 2004, different presidential campaigns wanted to have 9/11 families, support them. So that's great, but I'm going to talk to both of you, because if I learned anything, it's that you can't get much done in Washington if you're on one side or the other, if you're thinking long term. And not everyone, I think we can talk about this later maybe, not everyone's thinking long term, but I am, because I realize that these issues aren't going to be solved in one administration or the next. It's going to take a long time. So I hope that you guys will look out and see whatever it is that gets you excited, that makes you want to get out of bed in the morning and you feel passionate about, figure out what is it that I can bring to that table, and then go find lots of ways to use it, because you don't want to be doing the same thing your whole life. You want to be lots of different positions, but you want to be going towards one goal. At least that's what I'm doing. So I don't know what I'll be doing in a year. Maybe I'll have another film. I'm hoping that we'll have completely new ideas to be getting out there and getting terrorism survivors' voices heard around the globe. I don't know, but I can tell you that we'll be trying and coming up with new things, and we'll be using the moral authority that we have, because I know that that's our asset.
So I am intrigued by, I mean, obviously this moral authority is really very important, and you're very wise to use it, but obviously it needs to be used for something. Mm-hmm. And how have you, as a group of survivors, or you as an individual a person in that setting, how have you figured out how to use that effectively and where to put it, and to bring people to the table who themselves must be as diverse as any group of folks about, get tough, help understand, whatever the different points of view are. How do you, again, it's not partisanship, but it's just as emotional and it's just as deep, much more so. That's right. And so how do you use that in a really effective way?
Well, that's the adventure of it.
Yeah.
Every day is a new adventure. You never know when you're dealing with people who are suffering trauma. You don't know what emotion you're going to walk into. So I just acknowledge that up front. And sometimes it's my emotion, sometimes it's others. You just don't know. And for us right now, it's a very difficult time, because how many of you don't know that in 11 days, it's the 10-year commemoration to 9/11? Yes, we get told all the time. So I'm looking forward to the 12 days from now when we can get back to normal work. But I think from our perspective, it's really hard. But at the end of the day, the goal is so much more important than all the bickering and all the infighting that you may see, or all the different ideas. And The other thing is that there's space for all of us. So some 9/11 family members have gone on to do different things, and there's room for all of that. And that's what's great about it, because we can all work in our own ways towards the goal of making sure it doesn't happen again.
That's great. Now, there were two different issues that came up in this discussion. I particularly wanted to follow up very quickly before we move towards the audience. One was, you're all in the institution building business. And that's related to a comment you just made, which is, thinking about the long term. This is a society, we all grow up, maybe we smoke when we know we shouldn't, or eat too much, whatever it is, don't get exercise. We tend to be short term, and we have a political system there's a new election every 2 years, there's things of that sort, and yet we are all facing really big, hard, long-term problems that often require upfront investments to maybe even avoid a crisis, or at least to be more effective. So how do you get in the institution building, the long-term business, in an environment where almost all the rewards feel like they're piled up on the short, and by the way, costs, feel like they're piled up on the short-term side? How do you think about that? Any of you?
So I think one of the things, and this goes back a little bit to the discussion about Somerville and what you're trying to do there. I think one of the biggest problems we have in government is that we don't know what success looks like. And that what we have balanced against that is anyone who's trying to take a risk, who's trying to do something different. Those risks are so often punished in the short term, whether it's by bad press. So often we're crisis-driven. And so a big part of creating, I think, a long-term perspective and vision in any institution is setting long-term goals, being very clear about what they look like. But then also, the president likes to say, an advocate comes to him and says, here's what you ought to do. And he says, I agree. Now go make me do it. And I think fundamentally what he means by that is it's not enough to have the institution itself headed in a direction, but it has to have a set of stakeholders, a broader sort of coalition of support around doing that. When we created a plan to end homelessness under this president, that's sort of a nice full circle for me, having started at a homeless shelter across the street. The reason it's actually making a difference is not because I'm going every day to sit with a mayor or sit with somebody else to say, here's what the long-term goal is. But that mayor is hearing from a very broad range of folks that this is the direction. And by the way, we have solutions that can help get there. We created a plan in New York City to preserve or create 165,000 units of housing. The mayor used to say, more people than live in the city of Atlanta will live in this housing. And I'm gone, and frankly, Bloomberg will be gone in a couple of years. I am extremely confident that plan will live on, because when the next mayor comes in, council members and citizens and advocacy groups are going to say to that mayor, this is a good plan, and it's one that you have to carry on. So it's about coalition building outside of the institution, I think, that so often can help overcome that short term, and even more than short term, the lack of willingness to take risk, of how hard it is to take risk in the public sector.
If I can add to that, I couldn't agree more. A phrase I learned in Professor Roger Porter's class, American Presidency, I'll plug it here, it was one of my favorite courses, acting today with an eye on tomorrow. And in politics, especially, I'll say at the municipal level where you have 2-year terms, I can't tell you how many policy decisions from 40 years ago made by some mayors saying, well, a transportation system that's going to come 15 years down the road, I got an election next year, or we'll make this decision because it's politically beneficial for me. But part of that coalition building is to get people to recognize that in Somerville, that our overarching purpose is to make the city a great place to live, work, play, raise a family. Part of that are these long-standing policy decisions that we have to buy into today. Politically, they might be riskier in the short term, but when you have a whole community aligned, those oriented values just can't be for the decision makers. So you have to get community alliances towards that. Because there are too many consequences when you act in the short term, and we've been turning around. You can bring a city down overnight. It takes a couple of generations to bring it back. And that's what's been happening in our city. So I couldn't agree more.
Can I just add that you're all sitting tonight, what I would say is, if the president says, go make me do it, the number for the White House is 202-456-1414. You guys should call, wherever country you're from, you should call, you should get involved, you should get engaged. And I guess what I'm basically saying is, don't wait for permission to go do something, whatever it is. You're completely entitled to go out there and get it done now and get started now on whatever it is your long-term goal is, because we need to be more engaged as a community. And we can talk about that all we want, but if you're not going to go out there and do it, then the talk isn't really worth that much. So I would just plug that. That's what I think is really important for getting to wherever you want to go in the near and long-term future.
Pam?
I think that I'll actually build on all of this, and I would say that change is always hard, and everybody's all up for change until they have to make a sacrifice. And I think the critical thing is, especially with what you're seeing with the bipartisanship, kind of the division growing and growing, the system is set up to reward that. And so in order to change the system, you have to reframe the conversations that people have. And fundamentally, it comes from whether or not you sit in a position of being optimistic or pessimistic about what people want out of their lives. I think that I sit eternally in the optimistic zone, mainly because if I didn't live that way, I think that we've had an earthquake, we've had a hurricane, come on. I think if you don't sit from the optimistic zone, then you wouldn't see the fact that fundamentally people want really the same thing, and what we argue about is how to get there. And what the training and the toolkit here teaches you is how to surface and make more transparent those conversations so that people can come and bridge the divide. Just because we don't agree on exactly how to get there doesn't mean that we can't all get to the same goal. And so I think a lot of what my organization tries to do is to reframe the conversation. When did human rights become, or when did religion become all Republican, or human rights become all left? It seems a little ridiculous in this day and age that certain things are owned by political parties, when these conversations really are core conversations that should be had in the context of, frankly, a lot of change that the whole world is undergoing. So I think the answer to that question is that this is really change management, and if you understand how people make their decisions, and it's not based on an economic pros-con list, it's actually people make decisions based on who they think they are, right? They vote based on who they think they are. And once you get that, you can have a conversation about what that looks like and how we can get there.
In my own experience, I worked on welfare reform issues during the Clinton administration and other things at different times. But I couldn't agree more on this notion that, create a positive vision out there, a real goal. And you can fight over means, but if you agree that we're all trying to do the same thing, that's a very different story than you're a good American, I'm a bad American, whatever it is. And I just think that people really do. Their best spirits is what you can tap on. And that's one of the great things about people here at the Kennedy School, and all of you, obviously. People love to be inspired. They love to watch something that makes them believe again, because every day they're told they shouldn't believe in anything. So I think that's terrific. Now, in a minute, I'm going to turn to the audience. And so I would like to encourage you to think about, if you have a question, this is an extraordinary group on anything and everything. Please, there are microphones located here, and two halfway up the stairways there. I'll say a word about that in a minute, but first I want to ask one more question of our panelists. And by the way, if you don't ask questions, I will, so this is a really good incentive for you to ask the questions. It is one of the greatest features about the forum here. But my last question is this. You all were here at the Kennedy School. You took a variety of things and so forth. What's one word of advice that you wish you'd heard, or having been here for a group of people that some of them are just at the start of their journey, or at least at the start of their last year in some cases, what word of advice would you have for your Kennedy School part of your experience? I'll just go right down. Shaun? Besides work with Bill Apgar, you've taken away anyway.
Besides work with Bill Apgar, I'll talk about my other favorite class, actually. So I think so often in life, wherever you sit, it's hard to see whether it's somebody else's perspective, but it's also hard to see yourselves 10 or 15 or 20 years from now. And what I would say is remember that for many of you, not all of you, these may be the last years of school that you have. And where I think what I got the most out of in many ways of my experience were those things that I did that weren't necessarily connected to my professional education, particularly at a place like Harvard, particularly the kinds of students that come to the Kennedy School. You're all going to have remarkable careers, and you're going to have an opportunity for, whether it's in my case, learning how to finance affordable housing or many of the nuts and bolts tools of the trade. I would encourage all of you to step outside that and do the things that you love that you're never going to have a chance to do again, and to build yourselves as people, not just as professionals. And so I stumbled into a class called Literature and Political Reflection that Bob Coles taught, Robert Coles, who is one of the most remarkable human beings I've ever had the chance to spend time with. And we read a novel a week, and we'd get together with a dozen students at the Kennedy School and just talk about those books. And the only other requirement, other than writing about those books every so often, was that we spend time in service once a week. And I happened, on Bob Cole's recommendation, to go spend time with the Algebra Project, which had been started by one of the great civil rights heroes, Bob Moses, in the American Civil Rights Movement. And it changed my life. And a big part of it was, frankly, as I think we've started to talk about, just in order to figure out how to hear people's stories, to understand their perspectives, to be able to build coalitions, you've got to understand your own story. And you only can understand and be able to tell your own story if you really reflect on it in the perspective of other people's lives. It's reading books, it's sitting with a kid who's having a hard time learning algebra, it's volunteering in a homeless shelter. And it is, I will tell you, having been on 9 planes last week in 5 days, and having 2 young sons that I just absolutely adore spending time with, it's going to get harder. And you have a moment of opportunity, a space in your life to read, to think, to talk to the extraordinary people in this room, and to spend time doing things of shaping the way you think and the way you approach the world that isn't just about a career, it's about building a life. And that will make you more courageous in your career, make you more ambitious. A lot of the comments you've heard about just go out and do it. You're not going to be able to do that without understanding yourself and experiencing the things that this university can bring to you. Spread your wings in that time, because it's so short and it doesn't come again.
Yeah, I think my advice would be very similar, which is to be fearless. You're here for 2 years. You're paying for it in many more ways than just money. Your classmates are probably the best diamonds in the rough that you can learn from. Figure out what you think, how you think the world works, and challenge your own thought process on that. And don't be afraid to disagree with your professors. They actually like that, as I've learned, because that's actually how I got my job offer from Dalberg, was Danny Roderick sent my resume in. Surprised the heck out of me, because I disagreed with them a lot in class. Disagree with your professors, disagree with your classmates, get to know them. I don't really spend any time thinking about the problem sets I did or didn't complete. I do actually spend a lot of time talking to my MPAID classmates who ended up Minister of Finance of Chile and so forth and so on about their kids. So really, within these walls, there are people who are sitting right next to you. Get to know them and keep in touch with them. And through them, figure out what you think about how the world works, so that by the time you get out of here in the next 2 years, you have a story that you can tell that will not only land you the job, but will put you in a position that will help make a difference.
To add, I'd say one, be abnormal. I mean, it's going beyond your comfort zone, not just in class, about whatever profession you're doing. I'll tell people who work for me, don't just think out of the box, be abnormal. You know, champions are abnormal, and greatness is abnormal. Listen. I wish I was a better listener, and I'm a better listener now, but when I first took office. And I can tell you that coming to the school has had a profound effect on me professionally and personally. I was humbled by what I thought leadership was, and it's certainly not what I thought it was. I was humbled by the fact that where I thought I was a successful leader, I had failed, and I'm able to recognize failures better. Shaun mentioned about building up yourself. I can call you Shaun, right? It's my last opportunity. I probably won't see you again.
Yes,
personally. But, you know, you all have an opportunity to exercise leadership. You don't have to be the mayor. You don't have to be a secretary. Wherever you are in an organization, if the organization is 5 people or 500, you will have an opportunity to exercise leadership and recognize that. And one of the things I've learned from a few different courses and professors, which really strikes me, and I pray about this every Sunday, is not falling prey to your hungers along the way. Hungers of corruption, self-aggrandizement, traps you can fall into. I say in my business, we all have egos, but it's so easy to fall prey to your hungers, and you will fail. As Professor Porter told us at the end of the class, you'll be a bastard at that point. But those things really ring true to me. I've been so inspired by what I learned here, and I hope you find the same inspiration from the people around you more than anything.
Well, I'm a native Bostonian, so for all of you who have never lived through a northeastern winter, I just want to tell you it's okay, and to embrace it. Get an outdoor sport that you like while you're here, because it'll make the winter that much better. Because I remember when I first came, a lot of people were really scared about that, and as a Bostonian, I was a bit insulted. So just have fun with it. And I think what I would just add to what everyone has said, which has been incredibly insightful, is remember that this is your time, and you get to direct it as you want. So take control of your education, which means take whatever classes you want, even if people say, why are you going to do that? That doesn't make any sense. Well, it doesn't need to make sense to them. It only needs to make sense to you. I'm probably going to say something controversial, so Dean, close your ears, please, and all the professors in the room, which is, for most cases, grades don't really matter that much. So whether you get an A or a B, if you can get a B and go out and spend some more time with the people in this room, you get to decide that cost-benefit ratio, but it's obvious where mine went. And I have some really good friends from here. And I also passed. So just keep that in mind. That's all I'm going to say.
That's great. All right, now the floor is now open. What we'd like to do is line up at the microphones if you have a question. And let me just describe what a good question is at the Kennedy School. There are microphones here, although there's a photographer in front, he'll move. Here, here, and here. And what a good question from the Kennedy School has 3 qualities. First, you identify yourself. Second, you have one thought, okay? And third, it ends with a question mark. So with that, please come to the microphone and we'll begin. And I'll just go around kind of in order. Start right over here.
Hi, my name is Parvati Sandesh Kumar. I'm a second-year student at the Kennedy School here. Because the world's most challenging problems require us to increasingly ask what we can do together, I wanted to ask you about how you foster collaboration in the work that you do.
That's a great question. How do you foster collaboration?
I would say relationships matter, and they matter a lot. And one of the things I love about housing, actually, is that it touches so many other parts of people's lives. And so I get to work with so many other departments. And literally what I did, the only good thing about my wife and 2 boys living in New York City for the first 18 months of the administration is I never turned the oven on in my apartment once, because I was eating out just about every single night. And a lot of that was just building relationships with my colleagues where, you know, we all have sort of capital that we build with other people. And you need that capital when it comes to the time of making tough decisions and being able to work together. And we genuinely like each other in the cabinet. We spend a lot of time together. And so the work I've been able to do with Arnie Duncan, with Kathleen Sebelius, Ray LaHood, just a remarkable group of people. And a lot of it is building those kind of collaborations. The other thing I would say, we spent a lot of time early in the administration creating goals. We've created a HUD-STAT system. And a lot of the goals that we set were joint goals with other agencies. It was brutally hard to do at the beginning, and it has been completely worth it, because once we started to align what we're trying to achieve as agencies, that combined with the relationships has meant a broad kind of trust and need to work together that has really made an enormous difference.
Carie, you've got a really tough problem in terms of one level you share a very common and very deep and painful history. But on the other hand, you come from very, very different settings. So how do you do that? How do you build that?
Well, I think relationships is absolutely key. So even if you don't speak the same language, you can find a way to make a relationship. I mean, I was in an Indonesian woman's house, and I saw that she had these little sneakers that were Spider-Man sneakers for her kids. Her husband had been killed in the first Bali attack. And I showed her a picture of my nephews. And I speak very minimal Bahasa Indonesia. But I was able to communicate to her that my nephews love Spider-Man, and her sons obviously love Spider-Man. So clearly we're connected, and it was fabulous. And we had a great sort of conversation, but you knew that there was a connection there. And I think that that was being there, being willing to be there, and also finding that common ground, which, what Pam talked about earlier, is so important. And sometimes you just want to throw your hands up and say, but then okay, let's take a step back. Why am I engaged with this individual anyway? Oh, okay, it's because we both want to get here. And once you kind of can let the rest settle, it works out pretty well. But it's not always pretty, that's for sure.
Marie Danziger's class on the art of communication actually covers some of this, which is in order to actually create that relationship, you have to begin with relatedness. And that means that sometimes as a person, you have to just really be honest and say, I really messed up. I'm sorry. Sometimes it's coming clean. Sometimes it's admitting you're human and saying, oh, we disagree on this front or that front. But first and foremost, it's to establish that relatedness and that relationship. And then you can begin bringing together coalitions of other people that say, oh, this person has this and this person has that. Oh, did you know that you guys had this in common? And it really, it's a lot of building, and it's a lot of, it actually requires a lot of personal, for me at least, it takes a lot of effort on my part, at least, from a personal perspective, because it really requires me to be open in order to build those relationships. But if you don't do it, there's no way you can build coalitions of people who are very far apart together.
Joe?
Yeah, from my perspective, recognizing that the mayor can't solve every problem, no matter what I thought when I got in, that, hey, I know Somerville's history just top of my back, and I'll get you there. You recognize you need those partners, and you got to develop those relationships with allies from the social service agencies to stakeholders across the community to really achieve the goal of making Somerville a great place to live, work, play, and raise a family. And that means sometimes giving the work back to them and stepping back. I talked about being humbled, about recognizing, an issue which might have a great press clip as the mayor made the right call. I recognize it was actually a leadership failure on my part. I had an opportunity to get my stakeholders involved, give them the work, get a better process out of it, and it didn't happen. And I think what I've learned there and where I'm at now, our decision-making processes are so much better, and we have a community aligned in terms of the direction we're heading.
Very good. Right up here.
Hi, my name is Divya Dar. I'm from the MPP program. I've also got the title of being the shortest person in the Kennedy School. So, so I just had a question for Carie. Something you said about moral authority and leadership.
It's a question. That's all. It's okay if you're short. You can make it through the Kennedy School at 4'10 3/4. So
yes, thank you.
Even if your feet don't reach the floors.
I wanted to ask about leadership and moral authority. And something that Pam said, to challenge and disagree. So this is just something I want to clear up with you. So if you're going to assume that you can have moral authority in leadership, I would assume that you would create people who promote your cause and support you, and people who challenge your cause. And what I'm wondering is there a role in leadership if you want to end up with the goal that you want, which was more along the lines of an inquirer. So you're trying to enable people to discover their own truths. So instead of coming from a moral authority viewpoint, you come from an inquirer viewpoint as a leader. So I just wanted to ask you about that.
I think, just to go step back for a second to your question, you say presuming moral authority, that's the first thing. You can never presume it. When you're a leader of an organization, I would argue, and I'm sure we could all, you have to earn that moral authority. Now, in my case, it's a little different. Being terrorism, having your mom get blown up on TV, that does give you some moral authority, but it's easily squandered, just as in any case of leadership. Now, it gave me moral authority to go talk on TV about what it feels like to be a 9/11 victim. It didn't give me moral authority to go lead other terrorism survivors around the globe. That's something I had to work towards and earn, and it only comes by doing all the things that we just talked about, working with others, getting them to buy in, and getting them to decide, hey, Carie says, we want to start this group, Global Survivors Network. Do I want to be part of that? Do I think that's a good idea? And me stepping back and listening to what people had to say. In fact, the way it all went down is the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, also a Kennedy School alumni, and a very sweet man, and also not super tall. He brought me and other terrorism victims from all over the globe and held a symposium supporting victims of terrorism. I was representing the American victims. And while we were there, it was incredible because all these people from different parts, it was super cool to meet them and realize we're all there because something terrible happened, but we're mostly here because we want to make sure it doesn't happen. And then afterward, we went home and we thought, well, it's great that we spoke at the UN, but what we really need to do is speak in our home countries where people are sympathetic to the grievances expressed by terrorists. So we wanted to start an organization, and this is where we fell a little bit into our national stereotypes of took the American calling each other up, hey, you guys, you want to do something? And then them saying yes, and I got an invitation to go to Jordan and meet with Ashraf. And I literally landed at the airport and had met this man once, and he hosted me for 3 days. And he came up with the idea of what we were going to do and how we were going to do it, and it was phenomenal because he had led the organization. He had created it and started it then, and I just got to sit back and say, okay, now we'll go make it happen. And I basically implemented where he was the leader. So I don't know if I'm answering your question exactly. What I'm trying to say is you can do all that listening. That's part of being a leader, is you have to not just be in the front, you have to sometimes be in the middle or even in the back, depending on whatever culture you're working with, whatever problem you're trying to solve.
If there's anything that this school teaches you about a definition, it's that leadership, that definition is not what you think it is. When you walk through those doors, you think, and maybe it's just me, but I thought, oh, someone's the leader, as in grade school, like whenever someone stood up and they led the group and everyone followed. Leadership comes in as many types and forms and shades as you see people in this room. And every person, I myself felt really uncomfortable with the title of being a leader. I saw myself more as a facilitator and much more as a collaborator, someone who brought, but that's a form of leadership as well. And there's not going to be only one type of leader in any situation. Take the leadership class. You'll definitely learn this. If it doesn't change your view on leadership, I don't think you can get your money back, but you could come and talk to me. But I'll tell you that word is a very, very, and we're at a time in the world where hopefully that word is changing, and we're seeing it change and adapt. But traditionally that word was really only one way, and I would say that there's many different forms.
I would just add to that I think for me the greatest challenge around leadership in this role has been learning that you have to embody all those kinds of leadership in one person as well, and understanding based on who you're working with and what the moment is, what leadership looks like for that time and that issue, and yet doing that while retaining a sort of authentic voice about who you are as a leader, where your authority, moral authority comes from, and having a consistency there. And it's a very difficult balance. There are times where I feel like I sort of laugh with my boys. I have one who's picked up surfing. And there are lots of times where I feel like a surfer, where it's all about reading the waves and trying to figure out where the power is that you can ride to an example. So it really is about reading the situation. And there are other places where it's about creating that energy. And I think the best leaders really understand that it's about listening and understanding what's going to make leadership happen in a particular situation, but in a way that really is authentic to your own, to all of our own authority and moral strength.
Sometimes you're going to fail. It's not going to work out the way you want it, and you think you did everything right. Maybe the issue wasn't right. Maybe you didn't pace the issue or the work at the right pace. And these are things you can learn here. And recognizing what failure is and how to diagnose it, and that's something important, and some traits you really can come out of this institution with.
Just let me add one quick comment. First, you present it as though it's either or, but I actually think a lot of times you get moral authority by helping other people discover and think about and understand who they are. So I think leadership isn't between those, it is the combination of those two. I think that's really what makes it happen. I also think we shouldn't lose this notion of failure. I don't know very many people who ask when they talk about what they learned most in life, talk about their greatest success. In their heart, they know it was, oh my gosh, I learned a lot by screwing up. And one of the things that, we sometimes talk about the NASA pledge, failure is not an option. Not to fail is not an option. If you're not failing occasionally, you're not taking risks, you're not being bold. So I think those are both two great insights. Go ahead.
And if I could just, being honest about those failures and showing people that you've failed and acknowledging it is a really important part of being a leader. It's not just knowing it yourself, it's being able to admit it and help others learn from it.
But it's hard to do, especially in a world where you can find yourself, secretary admits. Go ahead.
Thank you very much for talking with us today. My name is Diana Lopez. I'm a first-year PhD student in health policy, and I'm also a registered nurse. And I have a dream to one day become the Secretary of Health and Human Services, which is one of the reasons why I came to Harvard. And I have another dream, which is to be a mother and to eventually get married and eventually have kids. And I guess my question to you all is, was there ever a time in your career where you felt sort of a push and pull between your familial self and your professional self? And doing public service, I'm sure it entails a ton of time and a ton of commitment around the clock. And so my question to you is, can you please give me some words of wisdom regarding just reducing my anxiety about eventually becoming a mother as well as a public servant?
I'll tell you what my sister says. My sister says you can have it all, you just can't have it all at the same time. And I know that's probably not the inspirational word that you wanted to hear. I'm not going to tell you it's easy and simple and you'll make it all work. Because you might not always be able to make it work. But if you think long term, if you want to be Secretary of HHS in 5 years, probably not the best time to start having kids. But if you're thinking in 20 years, well, I would hope, is it doable? I think so, I hope so. And I think if you look at it that way, I mean, I have so many friends in the same situation and by myself, and I'm sure all of us on this panel, and people think in the media here and now, and sometimes I think if you take that longer term perspective, then your career can be more intense at times and less intense at other times when the family stuff is more intense. And if you give yourself that flexibility, if you aren't the one beating yourself up that I'm not doing enough, then you might be a much happier person and actually get a lot more done too.
You know, I can speak a little bit to your issue. In 2003, I literally made the decision to run for mayor when I was on my way to the hospital. My wife was delivering our first child. And I won't tell you what she said to me before she went under. She forgot about it. I never mentioned it again. But a friend of mine really challenged my leadership and understood that I was going through some personal change. I actually thought about getting out of office. One thing that I'll tell you is, and all of you, is, which I've done a better job, I did not do a very good job at the beginning, was anchoring and grounding yourself. Your family, your prayer, your church, you go to the gym. I take comfort in, I coach high school athletics. It's sort of a solace for me. In my job, there's a sort of self-assassination that goes on just by your schedule. When people piling on, you get caught in this wave and you can't get out of it. And just being able to escape and stand at the ice skating rink and watch my son play hockey and just have a cup of coffee and stare at the wall for an hour. It's really, you anchor yourself. And that could be maybe with a close colleague, someone you can sit in a room with and really just be very candid with. So no matter what you do, I think you chase your dreams. Chase them. You can't predict what's going to happen. I didn't think I'd run for mayor. I didn't think we'd have 4 kids in 6 years either. So those things happen. So if you want to talk about how to balance that, I'll give you my wife's
We
number.
can help you with that last part.
So, but remember, when I talked about not falling prey to your hunger, things I learned that really helped me, it's the church, your friends, your family, some activity that anchors you down, and so you don't forget who you are.
I think I'd add to that, let go of perfect. It's never going to happen. Because I've actually literally just been there. I logged about 60,000 miles, airline miles last year alone. This year is a lot better, despite the earthquake and hurricane. My life has gotten better because I've prioritized, which is the second recommendation, is just to make sure you have your priorities straight. I always think through, who's going to be at my funeral? It's a horrible thing to think through, but who's going to be at my funeral? And that's how it's going to matter. Sometimes the decisions you make are really just a drop in a bucket of many decisions you're going to make. So is this one of the things that you're going to, is this going to turn the tables, turn the tide? And then the last one is really to not think about things that aren't going to happen immediately. I mean, you're just starting, or maybe you're just kind of embarking upon a path. Focus on that path. Focus on what's right in front of you. Don't worry about things that haven't happened yet. When you get there, you'll know what to decide, because you'll know who you are. So just try not to worry about things that you do need to plan somewhat, but you don't need to plan so much so that you've squeezed all of the joy and happiness out of your life. There are some things that you can make a decision when it comes.
I would just add, sort of on this don't aim for perfect theme, there are times, particularly in my low moments, where I think, if I ever feel like I'm doing a good job as secretary or a good job as a dad, something's wrong. Because I'm not spending enough time on the other thing. And so that tension is, I don't care who you are, if you're not feeling that tension, something's wrong with your priorities. But, and I particularly remember working for Bill the first time. My wife had just had our first son, and I remember sitting at my desk, and there was a stack of letters from not proverbially, literally the little old ladies in Iowa that were about to lose their homes. And it was stacked like this. And I remember looking at it and thinking, well, I could be selfish and go home to my wife and my young son, or I could stay here and help them to their homes. And I sort of snapped out of it and thought, that is dangerous. And you have to, and this isn't just about parenting, but it is incredibly important to work hard. And it's as dumb as like scheduling, right? Right, Mr. Rare? Like just carving out space in your day to focus on the important rather than just the urgent, because it is so easy to get caught up meeting after meeting. It's even harder now with the devices we have. It is so dangerous, because if you're not thinking, you can't be long-term, you can't do the important things, and that means family too, if you're not, carving out time during the day, whether it's an hour at least every day to sit and think and prioritize and read, or whether it's time to be home. And just the last thing I'd say is the best advice I got when I started working for the mayor is a wonderful woman named Sharon Greenberger, who has been running school construction authorities, #2 at the Department of Education now, just a great public servant. She said to me, my advice would be, and she's a mom of 2 girls, lived through cancer at one point. I mean, just has really struggled. She said, set your priorities early, tell everybody you're going to do them, and it makes it so much easier. So it's a great idea. I said, I'm taking my boys to school these days, I'm getting home for dinner these days, and nobody ever questioned. And it's remarkable how easy it is to fall into a pattern where you think you need to be connected all the time. Trust the people who work for you, let them do stuff, and engage when you need to engage.
Thank you very much.
Good advice, yes.
Yeah, my name is
This will,
Blake.
by the way, have to be the last question, I'm afraid. Sorry.
Happy to give it up.
No.
Okay. My name is Blake Hyatt. I'm a first-year student in the Master's in Public Policy program. You guys had touched on this a little bit earlier, but I'm wondering if you have any advice for the folks in this room about how to maintain momentum through failure. So when you don't achieve an objective, you can't always promise that you're going to pull something off. There's politics involved. There's a lot of other things involved that you can't necessarily make relationships get over it. How do you keep your folks motivated so that you can keep on achieving whatever goals you have set ahead that might be even harder than what it is that you just failed on?
You know, I first became mayor. I'll tell you a funny story. I got sworn in January 2004. In December of 2003, there was this great big snowstorm in Boston, and our city had a terrible snow removal policy. We didn't move cars. We didn't enforce it. Colin, you remember this, right? I think I told you a car that time. And in Boston, there's a story, an emergency vehicle couldn't get up the street, and sadly, someone died. So I came in, gangbusters. I said, we're going to adopt this new policy. We're going to tow and enforce, get the streets wide and cleared. Sure enough, I was psyched. First storm came down the road. I was waiting at the DPW yards. By 1 o'clock, I went home. I knew we towed 500, 600 cars, tagged 3,000. I woke up at 7 and look at the window, not a speck of snow on the ground. All right? So, sometimes it doesn't snow. And believe me, you're like, my God, did I have to take office this week? You talk about people not motivated to do anything else. And every major news station is waiting for the office. You just have to keep, and that's just to tell you, sometimes it's not going to snow. There's nothing you can do about it. All right? Sometimes you're going to feel, but you have one oriented value that you march to. I think that is important. What are you trying to do at the end of the day? In a city like Somerville or at HUD, in your particular organization, you remind people of that every single day and learn from failure, right? There's not much I can learn from that. It really wasn't my fault. I told that to the station, I forgave the tickets, but that's just a funny example. Like, you can't control everything. But people have got to still march lockstep and heel to one overarching purpose, and that's what you do.
So actually I do very similar things just on a personal and a big picture. I kind of allow myself a little bit of time to grieve whatever path I thought that I lost, whatever image or vision I had. And oftentimes with my teams, I do the same. We'll get in a room and I'll just say, you know what, you've got about 5-10 minutes. Want to hear it. And just let everyone get it all out. Oh, doesn't that suck? Isn't that horrible? Doesn't that person, they just don't get it. And just let everybody really get it all out. And then you refocus, right? You're going to fall. And in fact, sometimes I probably have developed, probably due to my Peace Corps years, a very odd sense of humor about failure. Because sometimes you find it really funny that things were, if you look back, you start to realize how inevitable it was and you just didn't see it because you weren't listening. And so it's really important to kind of allow yourself to go through whatever emotional trauma that you went through and let people around you feel that. And then pick yourself back up and go, okay, where do we need to go? What happened? What did we not see that we could have seen? How can we do this differently? It's worked for me both personally and on a professional basis just because I've seen my teams recover very well from it. But sometimes you have to guide people through that process because if you don't acknowledge that people had a vision and they thought everything was going to go well, then you're not going to acknowledge the fact that that's now gone away and you have to replace it with something else.
I would second that, and I think it's being able to acknowledge it with your team to make sure that there is conversation about it, that you don't sort of hide failure is important. Two other things I would say is, look, anybody who, the failure is all they see, or if it is happening enough, it's tough. You have to make sure that you are celebrating the successes along the way. There has to be a balance. And one of the things that I'm not very good at as a leader is taking the time to do that because I'm always sort of on to the next thing. And so just taking the time to celebrate where things do go right builds a real reservoir, I think, of being able to be more resilient in the times when they don't. And then the other thing, and this is, HUD is the most difficult organization I've seen, but I think it's generally true in the public sector, is that you have to create a culture of feedback and honesty so that failure isn't such a shock to the system. And what I mean by that is, if you have somebody who you work with or report to where on a regular basis they're sitting down with you and saying, you know what, this really worked well for me, but I didn't like the way you handled this, and here's a suggestion about a way to do it differently. If you have teams that operate in that way, where it's always kind of self-critical, I think you create a culture as an organization where that's okay, and people's skins thicken a little bit. This goes back to the point, like, disagree with each other, learn how to deal constructively with conflict and disagreement, and I think that builds up the ability, the resilience of an organization to be able to react to failure as well. Because when it's sort of, you're not talking about it, and then all of a sudden there's a big thing that's gone wrong, it's just very hard to know in the culture of an organization how to digest it, how to deal with it, and how to recover from it. If it's not something that's part of your habits of the way you operate every day. And so I think creating that culture of feedback and kind of performance more broadly in an organization is really important to be able to do it when things really do go wrong.
Here you get the last word.
I'll just add, and maybe this is a little more specific to what I do, is have perspective. When we have failures, did someone get killed today? Probably not. Most of our failures, that's not what happened. And in my group of individuals, that's why we're all there. So, it was a bad day, but probably not as bad as all of us have already experienced. Now, hopefully you're not in a group like that, but if you're all there for a common cause and something goes wrong, I think once you've gone through, I could not agree more with the allowing for the trauma and the grief, because it's real, and even if you're not talking about it, it doesn't mean people aren't feeling it. So allow for all that, and then let's say, all right, this wasn't what we wanted, let's put it in perspective. Here's our goal over here, and that's so much more important, getting there, than as upset we are here. Getting to do that process is going to make us feel better along the way and recognize that it could be a lot worse. It's one of my mantras. It'll always get worse. So it's not so bad. If you say it and you smile, it makes yourself feel better.
Well, this has just been a terrific panel, and on all of these issues, one of the things I learned, I remember vividly working in Washington. I had working for Secretary of HHS, as a matter of fact. But there was another part of failure. There was a lot of learning. Two things, though, that I was very struck by. This was Donna Shalala. One was she always had a plan for the next thing. Oh, okay, got to learn from it, move on. But the other striking thing, and this is also important, I think everyone here would say it, as a leader, you also have to have the back of the people below you. The worst response to failure is to say, this person screwed up, okay, and do it publicly. If you have their backs, they will go through, fire for you. If, on the other hand, you just, your first instinct is to say, well, I know you tried, but I think that's critical too. But that's what's special.
I want to completely second that. That is absolutely what Mike Bloomberg used to say. If I take the same person in Bloomberg, my company, and 3 times out of 10, their ideas work, that's somebody I promote, and I take money away from the 7 things that aren't working, I put them on the 3. The problem with the public sector is that same person probably gets fired, and you take the money away from the 3 things that are working, and you put them on the 7 to fix them because of the bad article. So he used to go, if you were trying to do the right thing and you were taking the right risk, he would call you up and say, do it again. I don't care about that article, do it again. And it's hugely important.
So I guess my reaction to all these folks is do it again. And I think I want to personally thank you for your service and your leadership. But to all of those of you that are part of the Kennedy School or just here visiting the forum, whatever, this is the first of many opportunities to listen and learn and so forth. But at the end of the day, it is all about making the world a better place. And I am so grateful that you took your time from all your duties of making the world a better place to invest in this piece tonight. So thank you very much. It was just a terrific evening.